Well, good morning, everyone. And this is Johnny's Tug Hole in Pilot Hill Road. And if you're not exactly sure, I'll be showing a map in a few moments, but this is on the south end of the island. If you go up past the Black Island School, you come to a dirt road, which is a town road, which is Pilot Hill Road. And this is actually a great winter walk. For one thing, it's not out in the middle of the field where there might be hunting on an adjacent field, which is always lends a little comfort. And it tends to be kind of protected along the road, and it's fairly easy walking. And so if not cold winter's day, Pilot Hill Road and its environs, including Johnny's Tug Hole, can be a nice winter walk. So with that, I'll head us off, and there we go.
There you go.
Okay, just had to go over and start over. All right, so this is the this is a Google Earth map from 1985, and the reason I picked this as opposed to a more modern Google Earth map is it has a little less brush on it, and therefore is it's clearer to see some of the things I want to point out. So we're going. This is Pilot Hill all along here, and it starts here and it goes along the edge of Johnny's Tug Hole and ends where Mohegan Trail comes out. And if you were to keep going straight and not follow the main road, you come out to the town-owned bluffs. I always call it town-owned bluffs. Some people call it second bluffs, but there's nothing second about it. So we're going to be going from north to south. If I were doing this walk, or if you were to do this walk, I would go from south to north, park at the little parking area by the bluffs, and then walk towards in the opposite direction of how I'm going to narrate it today. For some reason, I felt like it was better to go from left to right, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, because it starts with Pilot Hill and we go from there. This is going to be I'm going to talk a lot about the industriousness of Block Island. So first of all, the main thing, my main motivation was Johnny's Tug Hole, which is this pond right here. It's outlined kind of a funny shape. It's kind of elongated, and tug is an old name for peat. So the Block Islanders, when they were digging peat for fuel, which they could burn, from about the roughly the 1750s to 1850s, it was the main fuel source on Block Island. And peat is just not, it's vegetation that muck from the bottom of the ponds that you would drain the pond in the late summer when it was already low. Then you would dig out this muck and ball it up into balls like a small cannonball, and stack them so they could dry. And then you could burn those as a fuel source in a fireplace. And that's what, for about 100 years, that was the main fuel source of Block Island, because of course, all the trees and wood stock were long since gone. So there are many island ponds around the island that were used for tugging. And I guess it's a pretty localized term, and it refers to the fact that you got to work pretty hard to get this peat out of the marshland, out of the bog. But in order to do that, you had to have a wetland that could be drained. And because of the nature of the geology of Block Island, this is a rather elongated pond to begin with, sort of like fresh pond. And the elongated ponds are usually what's left over from the glacier as a meltwater channel. And if you follow this, you can just barely make out. There's a little spot here where it looks like it's marshy, and another one here, another one here, another one here. And these are all connected. It's hard to see in the photo because you're not on the ground, but this pond would be drained out through this part. And I'll show you a little bit later where water is going underneath a bridge, and it would ultimately end up down in these wet bogs down here. And then they would dig the peat out of there, dry it out, and dam it up again at the end of the season, let it get water and get ready for the next season, which would have been making ice. So more about that later. Interesting, this lot Johnny's Tug Hole is the newest acquisition. It was purchased in 2020 by the Land Trust, and the Nature Conservancy has easements over it. And so it joins several other parcels that are also owned by the Nature Conservancy and the Block Island Land Trust. What I like about this photo also is that it shows many pathways, none of which exist right now. This is all thick brush. You cannot get into this backside. But wouldn't it be nice if someday soon we could have a loop path that went around the pond, and something to aspire to. The reason these are have these pathways in it, you'll sort of can tell they're following stone wall lines and boundary lines. This was actually a subdivision, and it was so a developer had subdivided the property for housing lots, and the Nature Conservancy and the Block Island Land Trust were able to purchase those and save this for open space. It's really important land, very thick brush for birds, and especially there's at least one nesting site known of the northern harrier or the marsh hawk on the backside of Johnny's Tug Hole, where it gets a little marshy. All right, just a little bit more sort of wayfinding. These fields are owned by Sue Ann Millikin, the Millikin family. And that's Sue Ann Millikin was the owner of Johnny's Tug Hole, and was the seller to the conservation groups. Let's see, I'm sure there's many things more I wanted to say about this map, but I guess we'll move on.
Hey, Kim, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
there was this one question that came up in the chat, what the circles are the top right. Is that part of just like the survey maps?
Oh yeah, these over here,
Yeah,
these are just part. So if you go on Google Earth, you'll see these. And it's just when I took the screenshot of the Google Earth section that I wanted, it happened to be there. Same thing with the bar. Unfortunately, the history bar behind the name. If you take the shot from the most recent one, the date bar isn't there, but in this case, I couldn't seem to get rid of it when I took this screenshot. So those are nothing. Look away from those. And one other thing, the map, the survey map, every map I've ever looked at says John E's Pond, but nobody on Block Island calls it that. Everybody I know calls it John E's Tug Hole. And in this particular slide, I have a period after the E. That is incorrect. My English background made me put it in there, but it's wrong. In the colloquial way of Block Island, it's always without the period. Johnny was a person, and not to be confused with Johnny. And with that, we'll take the next map, which I'm hoping is going to come up here. I think I'm taking too long on these slides. It won't advance. What's going on? Having technical difficulties today. Let's go out. Let's go. I'm gonna have to go back and start again. Darn. All right, sorry about this, folks. So what happens when I do that? You know what I think it is? I think the bar is.
Kim, do you want to answer another question while you're multitasking?
Sure. No,
just another one came up about how many tug holes are on Block Island. Do you have a sense of like how many were?
There's a lot. I'll just start rattling off some. Clay Head, there was, the pond that went over the edge at Clay Head. The back part of that was is still there. It's very marshy. That's a tug hole. There's any swampy pond could have been used as a tug hole and would have been. And people had tug rights. There we go. People had tug rights. So you would transfer. So somebody would sell a piece of property, but they might retain the right to get tug out of the swamp that was on the property they were selling, which is pretty interesting. It's like seaweed rights or rights to pass over a property. A lot of the old deeds retain tug rights or peat rights. In the 70s or no 80s, there was a little here's a group, Jerry might remember this, a Black Island Economic Development Foundation was studying, that's right, when the the energy crisis, was studying whether or not peat could be a good source for energy on Block Island. So they wanted to know how much peat was here and what the quality was and whether or not it could be harvested for that purpose. Now, let alone that DEM would probably have a stroke if you started digging up all the ponds. But anyway, it turns out that the study showed there's lots of tug. You could have kept the power company going, year after year after year with the tug if you could get it. But the peat rights were more problematic than getting to DEM. Unraveling the peat rights and who had rights to different ponds was going to be very problematic. All right, so like usual, I've digressed. Let's try this again. This is this map I just popped up as part of the 1890s stone wall map. And the reason I wanted to use this was to see it shows topography lines. So you can see the general flow of water. And even in the late 1800s, there was a water body here, which is where it would drain off. And this shows the lowering of the topography out towards these water bodies. Slightly different road. This Pilot Hill Road was there. And the road that came by the Southeast Light was actually on the other side, was on the shore side of this pond. Now it's on this side of the pond. This is called Pilot Hill. It's one of the tallest spots on Block Island. This Pilot Hill is right behind Sue Ann's house, the highest spot in this part of the island at 178 feet. But a still higher point is over here. And this is about 100 and I can't quite see it, 83. But what's interesting about this house, and you'll see this as we go along, this was one of the watchtowers, lookout towers from World War II. And it happens to have one of the geodesic markers because it was a government facility at the time. And that is, if you look over on the aerial photo, that is this house here. So with that, I think I've gotten your bearings, and I think I discovered the problem was that I had the bar with all the information on it was over where I needed to hit the advance. So here we are at the beginning of Pilot Hill Road on a snowy day. And as I sort of alluded to, these photos, because they're taken over a period of time in preparation for this, are a mix of snowy photos and not so snowy photos. So this was a snowy one. So we're on the northern end of Pilot Hill Road, just where it turns dirt. There's pavement here, but it's dirt here. And this is a stone marker put in place by the Block Island Historical Society, and it commemorates the pilots. And if you don't know, Block Island had a great number listed here on the stone of pilots, quote, pilots who would, these are boat pilots who knew the waters very well. So they would wait for a ship who wanted to go up Narragansett Bay, but didn't know the waters. And so they would hire one of the boat pilots of Block Island to escort them and show them the waters up the Narragansett Bay. And there were quite a few of them, as the stone indicates, very competitive. There's some great old tales about how people sort of jumped the gun and got out of line. It's sort of like being in a taxi stand, only it wasn't stand in line to pick up the next ship going up the bay. But that is why Pilot Hill has its name. It's one of the higher spots on the island. So you could see ships approaching from almost all directions. And maybe if you saw a ship before somebody else, you could get the edge on getting in your fishing boat usually and going out to them and offering your services as a pilot. So Block Islanders had very had a lot of industrious ways of making their living, and being a boat pilot was one of them. Thus the name Pilot Hill Road. So first thing I'm doing after I leave the entry is go up onto the fields. Now this field that I'm on is Sue Ann Millikin's. It's private land, but I had permission to go up, and I wanted to get a good photo of Johnny's tug hole from the north side. It's one of the few places you can get a good picture of the whole pond, because it's pretty much ringed by brush, and most of the photos are sort of peering between things. This little pump house down below is the Millikin family, and Sue Ann told me that her family pumped water out of the pond until about the late 60s, when the Gould started drilling wells on Block Island. Now I took a little diversion and I went off through her field. So I'm going down this hill. Now actually you can't tell because of the photo and it's 2 dimensions, but see this band of sort of greener? That's a flattened out part. So the hill goes down pretty precipitously, big round hill, and then it hits this flattened out part, and then it drops down again to the pond. This is an old road that would have joined up to Pilot Hill from the fields, from the Millikin fields. And you get another look at that shortly. But as you go down, you go to the edge of the pond. This is where the Millikins have access to the pond still. And she told me about her brother, George, who used to go diving in there in the summer times when it was a little warmer, and found a whole bunch of silverware that he kept dredging up and bringing back every year, a few more pieces of silverware. She didn't know where it had come from, but anyway, that was an interesting story. And then again, another view of the pump house looking along this edge, the western edge of Johnny's tug hole. And throughout, there's high water right now, but there's a stone wall that runs just like this through. You can see the top of a few of the stones. And in the summertime, you can actually see a lot more of this stone wall. But, and there's a close-up view. There's these 2, I think it's 2 islands. She thought maybe it was one, and this one is now attached, but there's these 2 little islands, which you can see from various spots as you go along. And I just did a close-up to prove that it's actually an island. Now, I did turn left and go west a little bit through the fields, and because the beauty of the landscape, as always, I cannot resist. And these rolling hills, looking back at the Millikin farmhouse, this is one of the only houses that was on that stone wall map from 1890s. All the other houses that are in this area, or many of them were not yet built, but the old Millikin farmhouse was there then. Now, if you go through the field a little bit, you come through this pile of rocks. Now, a lot of old Block Island farms have a pile of rocks, a storage pile of rocks. And I always thought it was for, when you're plowing up the fields, you need some place to put the stones. So you just put them in one place, and then they're handy by if you ever need them for something, ballast or filling in a hole or something like that. But I did notice a lot of these rocks are sort of a little darkened, as if they were part of the pavement or something. And it turns out that Sue Ann's great-grandfather worked for the town road. And whenever they were cleaning up, and of course the town roads then, many of them were still dirt roads. They weren't all paved roads, but so when they were clean, and they would have been covered with, a lot of times they used oil and little patches of macadam before they were really paved. And so whenever there was excess rocks around, he would haul them back to this one spot. So he has a good pile of rocks, of which nobody knows what they're going to do with it. In the same field, there was a lot of these sticking up. These are the seed pods of common mullein, and quite beautiful. If you were on some of my programs in the summer, you would have seen these are beautiful yellow, where the flower, each one of these little seed pods is an individual flower, and the flowers bloom from the bottom up. So even in the winter, they're really quite beautiful. Also, the trees going along here, if you look up, it's pretty hard this time of year to find flowers, so you got to find what you can find. And you look up into the branches and you see these little clumps. Well, these little clumps are lichen. and it's a beard lichen, and this particular species is the bushy beard lichen. And a lichen is a symbiotic organism that is part fungus and part algae, green algae or blue-green algae, which is able to photosynthesize. So lichens on a tree are not deadly. Fungus by itself can be, but lichens are not. They're simply attached as a place to be. They get most of their energy not from the tree, but from the photosynthesizing algae within the fungus. But beautiful in its natural design. Just, if you've been watching for a while, I can't resist some of the innate beauty of nature when you look at it closely. So now we've turned back, and I've done enough trespassing with permission. And you can see again, the earlier picture, I was at the top of this hill looking down at this old road, and you can see the topography where it sort of flattens out. And this road would have gone out and ended at Pilot Hill and gotten access there. So they would have brought the old teams up this way with the horses, whether or not they were going down to the pond to dig peat, or in later years to cut ice. So we'll start back up the hill in a different day, again, looking at Johnny's tug hole. This was just on Saturday, I think. It was so beautiful. Half the pond is ice with snow on it, and the other half is open, which is pretty typical on windy Block Island. Of course, you can't go anywhere without fresh snow. You're rarely the first set of tracks. And these are, of course, deer footprints. So I don't know why they made that big arch, but it did. Now we're back out on Pilot Hill Road, proceeding to the south, and right as you come up the first hill, there's this little opening, and this is where the old road that I was just talking about would have come out. So, and it's just a short little, very easily accessed down to Pilot Hill Road. And along this stone wall, these beautiful lichens, more lichens. This is a sunburst lichen, and so it's, I think, well named, quite beautiful. And these next few are shamelessly just for their raw beauty. This just looks like old Block Island, an old, recently plowed, snowy road, old road curving around, looking at the Millikin farmhouse. And again, looking at the end that we just came from, the northern end. And one more, and then I took this when I was looking at the fields. This is looking from Pilot Hill Road over the stone wall across the fields, and what I couldn't resist was the texture. If you look at it, you've got these grassy, most of this is going to be switchgrass and panic grass. Obviously, they've cut and left an island of it, the brush line, the stone walls, the snow on the fields. The texture of Block Island's landscape, I would challenge anybody to find any more beautiful. Again, we're peeking through the brush, trying to look at that island out there. But on the horizon, on the back side of the pond, you see this weird looking house, and that is a little closer. I'm trying to get it from a different vantage point. What is that big square thing on the, it looks like a square corn silo. And a little closer, you finally start to figure that this is actually one of the watchtowers. These were built, there were 5 of them built on Block Island. And these were observation towers at high points on Block Island, put in play, built by the government right after the beginning of the Second World War, for watching the waters, just like a pilot would be watching the waters for ships. These were watching the waters for enemy German ships. And of the 5, there's one on southeast in the southeast corner of the island. This one at Pilot Hill, one Beacon Hill, one down the neck, that are all still in existence. And then there was a Was that 5? Yes. And then the one that's not in existence anymore was out at, near Lewis, between Lewis and Dickens Farm. So surveying through the southeast corner, the south end of the island, southwest corner of the island, and the north point, where they had these, and the very top of the island, Beacon Hill, where they had these watchtowers. And as I say, now they're private residences, historical residences. And there's one more good view with a, this is a telephoto lens, so it really foreshortens the distance, but there it is. All right, still going along the pond, peering in, trying to figure out how I can get a better picture of Johnny's tug hole. And looking, you can look, if we're sort of looking south at this point, and at this point you may remember from the map, it forks, the pond forks and goes sort of to the southeast and sort of to the southwest, and with these little islands sort of in the way. Now there's one point where Johnny's tug hole comes down and the water is right at Pilot Hill Road, and there's a little tiny sandy beach here. If you've been to the island, you're probably familiar with it. I'm referring to it loosely as a beach. It's a standing point, but many people go down there to swim, which they're probably not supposed to, or boat or fish. And this is a panoramic view, so it's a little distorted. So just think of, we're looking to this is down where I talked about the forks. We're looking to the south and then slowly across what would be looking straight across the island. There's a little cove back here, and then to the north up towards the Millikin land. And it's a little marshy back here and very inaccessible, which is probably generally where the marsh hawk nesting site is generally. And just a little bit more, just a less distorted view. Here's one with not so much snow looking to the south down to that fork, one straight across looking at the cove, and then one looking sort of through around the bush. You'll be happy to know I didn't dare walk on the ice to take these photos, so it's hard to get around the bushes, but I won't say that I wasn't tempted. I'd do anything for these programs, but I wasn't willing to do that. And then one more along the edge, the eastern edge of the pond, beautiful snow hanging on the branches into and over the water of the pond. And then across, a close up on the west edge where that little cove is. And again, here's a few of those stone walls making stones, top of the stone wall. Underneath the water there is a stone wall, or leftover parts of a stone wall. So careful if you go rowing out there, don't go too fast. You might ground yourself on one of those. So along the edge of the pond, there's lots of vegetation blooming in the summertime, like the mullein is in the summertime, a sweet pepper bush. And these are the seed pods of sweet pepper bush that they love to have their feet wet. So from about the area where the lowest part of Beacon Hill, where it touches Johnny's tug hole, along that whole edge going south, there's lots of sweet pepper bush in the summertime. And again, each one of these little nodules is a flower blossom that has now dried up and contains the seeds. Oops, I guess I went a little too fast there. And then here's stepping back, looking again, another panoramic view, but only not a full 180, so it gives you a little less distortion. I spent a lot of time trying to get whole pictures of the pond, which is quite difficult unless you're up in the air. But I kind of like this one. It shows a good portion of the pond, where the beach part is right around this corner. We've come past that. A lot of this in here is different shrubs and the sweet pepper bush. And now we're coming up to the top of the next hill, which is where there is a newly cleared hilltop. And so you can go up there now and get a long view. You're up a little bit of an elevation, and right at the middle of this hilltop, it's been beautifully cleared just a couple of weeks ago. and it's going to be kept as an open space, as a public spot to rest. And there will be, I think they're going to put a fieldstone bench up there where you could see. I hope they're going to cut a little of the brush in this area, because when this leaves in, you won't be able to see anything, unless you were to climb the tree, which I don't recommend. But I was lucky enough to have this beautiful shed in both non-snow and snowy, and it's just beautiful. And this one is just because it's beautiful. Again, I try to position it so that at least in this one, the Millikin farmhouse is right in the crux there. And so wonderful place to rest as you're going along on your walk between the Pilot Hill marker and the southeast and the Mohegan Bluffs. And if you were to climb up that tree a few feet, not too high, you could get a better view of the pond. So looking over the pond towards the Millikin field. And again, here's let's see if I can see it, the little pump house right there. And what's cool about that pump house actually is it has solar panels on it. So when it was pumping water out of there, they used solar panels to run the pump. So those Millikins, they stayed ahead of the times. From this very spot, on 2 different days, I saw 2 different great birds, a Downy woodpecker on the left and a very cold looking great blue heron, wondering what the heck have I gotten myself into. But there it was. Not the best photos I know, but you can tell what they are. Now, right next to that hillside, right where the tree is right to the south of that. If you look through the brush, you can see these foundation ruins. And this one is the one on the corner. So the pond would be over here. This is the northwest corner, and that goes along this way. And then if you comes along the top, this is the backside, and then makes this. This is a foundation ruins of an old ice house. And like Tug pulling peat for fuel, ice before electric refrigeration, which electricity didn't come to Block Island until around 1925. So there are many years of cutting ice. It was a lot colder back then, and many of the ponds were used to cut ice. And they would have these ice houses at the edge of the ponds, usually fairly close. In this case, this is a perfect setting. And this was a fairly large one. This is the backside. Pilot Hill is on this side of and the backside is cut deep into the ground, and then it would have opened up almost at the shore, at shore level. And so they could cut ice, and they would have a ramp, and just like pull the ice, sliding it up the ramp into this barn for a storage. And because it was so well insulated and it was so cold, once you filled it up with ice that maybe 3 feet thick blocks of it, usually about 4 to 6 feet long, and then 3 square, and they would just stack them up. And then there was a Block Island Ice Company that used to deliver ice around to the homeowners and to the hotels. Most of the ice houses were operated by some of the bigger hotels that needed to have ice, and they would have an arrangement with the owner of the property. So, and again, there were many ice houses on Block Island. Not only this one, where Robbie Murphy has his gas station now, where it used to be John Thomas's gas station. On that very lot, there used to be a double ice house, and they used to pull ice right out of that little pond called the Sinclair Pond, right next to that. The Ocean View and the Spring House, they all had their own. The Central House, most of the bigger places had an ice house where the men would cut ice and store it for winter usage. So lots of history along this road, from the pilots to the tuggers to the ice house. And here I am still trying to look back in that. I'm trying to see if it's 2 islands or one. It's definitely 1 island. the early map does show this as a second island, but it may now be attached to the mainland, maybe like a swampy peninsula. Hard to know. I've never been one to haul a boat up there, but I'm getting more and more intrigued to go paddling around in the back part of Johnny's tug hole. So the sort of going backwards just a second, the foundation ruins of the ice house are really interesting, to know that it's there and to know that what happened there, but they are not going to be cleared out for access. They are in very unstable condition, and conservation does not want to invite any climbing or getting into there because it's potentially very dangerous. The top of that one wall is probably 8 feet down through rocks and rubble that's fallen down and trees. There's a whole shad growing out of the foundation in one place, making it even more unstable. And not to mention, I'm sure, plenty of poison ivy. And again, another picture looking a little bit closer. Oh my God, everything's going wrong here. Sorry about that. Looking a little closer in the southern end, it's frozen over. This is very thin ice that particular day, so I wasn't tempted at all. Very interesting. I think part of the, you see a little of the sweet pepper bush growing right here. This is that, and down here as well. I think part of the charm of Johnny's tug hole is it's intriguing. You can't always see into it, or you see things, you can see the same thing from different angles. And so it's just a great place to gaze. And you know, the great blue heron was back in one of these little nooks. And if it was open water, there's almost always in the wintertime bufflehead and hooded mergansers in there. Here we are again, trying to peer through the brushes at that little island. How big is it? What's growing there? And still looking and noticing the colors. Right now, Black Island, the bare brush is starting to turn color, and it goes from sort of a nice gray to this sort of mauvey red, which are reddening of a lot of times briars, the vines of briars, but also very shortly the buds on the shad and the various shrubs on the island are going to start getting just a little tinge of red, and kind of gives the whole island this look of a sort of a mauvey reddish hue on top of these gray mounds of brush. So starting to see a little spring in these images. Now, as we've gotten to the end, near the very south end of Johnny's tug hole, there's a private driveway that has a bridge on it. And there's a bridge on it because it's spanning the flow of water from Johnny's tug hole out towards the bluff edge. And I have not mastered video, but I would have loved to provide a little video showing the water flowing here, but you get the idea. And finally, we've come to the end of Pilot Hill Road. So now we're at the south end, looking back, looking northward. And from this spot, and if you go down, there's a big, it's a Y. If you come down Pilot Hill, you can come this way, or you can go off this way. And between these two arms of the end of Pilot Hill Road is this little, also swampy area. It's very low, these little holes all around here, catching the water that's flowing from upland. Now, if you were to come down here and take a right, you would be back on the main road and looking back at where Pilot Hill comes out and divides. So this spot is this spot. And this is a little hollow. It's filled with reeds and it's marshy and wet. And the town road crew has opened it up in the last few years and keeps it mowed and has this little bench for weary bike riders and walkers to contemplate this beautiful little marshland, which there happened to be a song sparrow and a Carolina wren hopping all over the place in there when I was there. Now it can't be the most restful in the summertime when you've got cars coming on all three sides of you, but It's a wonderful little spot, and it is in fact part of that whole wetland system that comes down from Johnny's Tug Hole. And then across the street is this is a pond, open water here, but it's surrounded by these shrubs that just love to be submerged in water. So this is all Buttonbush, and it's a really interesting shrub, again blooming in late July. But right now you can sort of see through its stem, its stumps and branches, and see that it's actually sitting in water. And again, it's the texture, the sort of very subtle hues of the colors of this time of year. So this is between the Mohegan, right at the end, across the street from the end of Pilot Hill. Mohegan Trail, the paved part is on this edge, and this edge are the bluffs. And then if you go, as you come down Pilot Hill, if you go to your right, again, that corner, the inside of the paved road, which goes around like this, is very swampy wetlands, which is where that water that's going underneath that bridge is coming out into this area and sustaining this little area of Buttonbush shrubs. So we're pretty much coming to the end. There's a stone wall there that's, again, more lichens. And you notice lichens right now can go from very pale. This is called a green shield lichen. Green shield is a whole group of types of lichens. That is not the specific genus species. I can't name the specific. But as the spring comes on and moisture is returning to these, they start to get greener, and you can already see it happens very quickly, and they'll pale out too when they dry out very quickly. But this had a fresh set of snow on it, and it just greened up quite a bit, and that is the photosynthesis doing its work in this lichen. But again, the texture of the hard rock, the green lichen, the snow, the formation of the stone walls, who doesn't love it? Now, we are pretty much near the end of this part of the talk. I got a few more things, but here is a question. What is Rhode Island? What's Rhode Island? Well, Rhode Island is where Johnny's pond is on Block Island. This was a Jeopardy question in January 2017. Johnny's pond, they still call it pond, but we know it's Johnny's Tug Hole. They use the period, but we know no period. So I was sort of thrilled to find out that our subject was, in fact, a Jeopardy question one day. With that, we'll go to winter fun, just a few images for you that are not on Block Island and often asked, what do you do in the winter, or does it snow on Block Island? Well, sometimes you're lucky enough to get some winter fun, and these are some ice skating mallards, and these are some ice skating people. Just a couple of weeks ago, not too many days this year, but at least we had some ice skating days. Beautiful ice. Not cutting ice, never thick enough for that anymore. And sometimes a layer of snow is just beautiful on the Block Island stone walls and open fields. Sometimes the birds, these are snowbirds, little pun there. This happened to be a herring gull that spent the whole last snowstorm sitting on my truck, snow piling up around it, and in the field next door, the Canada goose walking through a little snowy blizzard. Not too hard, but falling in big, heavy drops. And so what do you do in the winter? Yesterday, I went for a walk just because I knew today wasn't going to be so great, and I couldn't help myself. I did a little bird watching, and these are bufflehead just riding the waves off of Crescent Beach. And I happened to get my luckiest picture ever. This bufflehead stretching its foot. Not too many people have ever seen the foot of a bufflehead while it was swimming. And in the little bunch of buffleheads, there was a red-breasted merganser. And along the beach were several sanderlings, all working on the seaweed. So these photos were all taken from one spot from Corn Neck Road, looking at Crescent Beach. Along the way, we saw this beautiful song sparrow, and people might say, "Oh, it's a little puffed up." Well, that's that is an indication of cold. And so these song sparrows is a species that we have a lot of on Block Island, and they seem to relish the cold. But that's a lucky front-on picture where you can actually see its little dot. And in the nearby area, there's a stand of privet that were still in berries, and there were about, I'd say, 24 American robins chowing down on those privet berries yesterday. So the robins come and go. They do stick around, and they sort of migrate away and then come back. As long as they can find food, they're going to stick around. And there are lots of privet berries. Most of the winter berries have been eaten by now, but they're moving on to privet. And with that, we're to our bird list, a little mini bird list over several days of birds I saw while I was at John E.'s tug hole. And there is nothing more resplendent than a male cardinal in winter snow. And thanks to Kathy Joyce for that photo. So thank you, and I'll take any questions.
I'm sorry, I muted you, Kim.
I've been so thanks to Kathy Joyce for the photo, and to Sue Ann Millikin for all the time she spent with me, confirming that it was John E.'s tug hole, not John E.'s pond, as all the maps say, and various stories about the Millikin family. So with that, I guess I will stop my share and go back and answer questions.
Great, thanks, Kim. I'm sorry about muting you there by accident, but there were a couple questions in the chat if you want me to start with those.
Sure. Yep.
And comments as well. One was about the lichen on the trees signifies excellent air quality. So
yes.
Yeah. So and who was John E?
Well, John E. It was John E. Millikin. So it was one of the owners in the area. So the Millikin family. If you spend any time doing genealogy on Block Island, you'll find that there are Millikins spelled K-I-N and Millikin spelled K-E-N. So I'm not exactly sure which one. I think it was the K-I-N. I did talk to Sue Ann about that. I wanted to know who owned the ice house and whether or not there were any photos of the ice house. She didn't know of any photos, and she wasn't sure who owned it. I did go to one of Bob Downy's books, and he has a good section on ice houses and cutting ice. And he did have a name there for the owner of that. And I plan to talk to Sue Ann about whether or not she confirms or not. So,
okay. And Judy Gray made a point to say that the swampy area at the end of Pilot Hill Road is a source of water for erosion of the bluffs.
Right.
Yeah.
Most of the water, much of the erosion on the bluffs is not from below. It's from groundwater seeping out throughout the island, and it may go underground, and then it will find an interface between very sandy soil and very clayey soil. And at that interface, there's a place for water to flow, and it will flow towards the edge of the island. And you can see water coming out of the bluffs 24/7, 365 days a year, and that is groundwater. So a lot of the water in that whole area, all the way to Fresh Pond, Seneca Swamp, also Fresh Pond and Johnny's Tug Hole run in the same direction and are fairly parallel. And they're, as I mentioned, they're both elongated ponds. They're both geologically formed as a meltwater channel from an early glacier. And then they get stopped up by the clay that got piled up at the bluffs. And then the water goes down in underground into the water table. And then it finds these places to seep out. So most of the erosion is from the inside out on Block Island. Not that there isn't plenty from down below, and wind-driven sand also will sort of sandblast the face of the bluffs. So you have to be careful when you ask me a question. You might get a lot more than you were bargaining for.
Love it. And Kim, what pond were the skaters on? Was that Mill Pond? Was that
Yeah, that was Milltail,
Milltail Pond? Okay.
Milltail Swamp Pond, and it is the pond right out my window that I can see from here. So I am a lucky person. I get to watch the people having fun without getting cold.
Yeah.
Or
So if anyone,
risking a broken bone.
well, great. If anyone has a question, they can unmute themselves and
I have a question for Kim,
Sure.
Dave Sinclair. I used to, as a little kid, we used to go up to the Pocono Mountains for summertime, and back in the 30s, and they had an ice house there that was still in existence for cutting ice or storing ice. And we were able to climb up into it, and we found ice buried in sawdust deep in this big old wooden building. I
Yeah.
wonder if there's any evidence of what they used to store the ice in on Block Island. Was it sawdust, or do you think there was other ways they were able to store it?
There were some places that had sawdust, but it depended on whether or not it was somebody who had access. Mostly it was hay. They would use hay they would put it they would sort of insulate the building, which was usually already built into the ground, with hay. And then they would put in a layer of ice, and then they would put a layer of hay, and then they put another layer of ice, and it would often look like the ice house would have one opening at the top and at the bottom, so that once you filled up the bottom, then you could start sliding up a ramp with a hook and a pulley. You slide the ice up the ramp into the top and drop it down, so you could get ice in and out from the top or the bottom. But mostly they used hay on Block Island.
Do you think there's any of these ice houses left that they could recreate that whole process, or is that something that just doesn't make economic sense?
I'm sure it doesn't make economic sense, but more importantly, we don't have the cold winters to produce that thick of ice anymore. I mean, if we get 6 inches of ice, I'm sure we didn't have 6 inches. We probably had about 6 inches of ice at our coldest part so far this winter. But and what they used to do, and again, if you get a chance to look at Bob Downy's book, there's a great picture of where they were pulling ice out of the Sinclair Pond, which again is the one that's next to the old gas station, which doesn't look big enough, but again, know that that is connected to a huge swamp area, which was also used for tug. So that area would have been used for tug and ice as well. But they would cut with saws while on the ice, these big blocks, and then they'd be floating. Then they'd haul a block out and slide it along the others to the ice house. And so we just, unless we go back to the Little Ice Age, which would be nice, but not likely in my lifetime. We're probably not going to have thick enough ice to make it work. But you could do it for a little home use once in a while. I'm known to put my refrigerated needs out on my back porch in a pile of snow. So.
okay, actually there is another question. If no one, is peat a renewable resource, or does it take too long to form?
Takes too long to form, and I guess it could be considered it's definitely considered a renewable, but there are places, we weren't the only ones to use peat. We might have been the only ones to call it tug, but peat was used throughout New England until coal became more prevalent. And coal was a great improvement for Block Island because it came pretty much free. When they were shipping it from New York to Boston, the ships would wreck on Block Island, and the whole hull full of coal would be deposited on the beaches right down there for Block Islanders to go down and pick it up and start using it. But peat is still used quite a bit in Ireland and in Scandinavian countries, or at least I think it is still used a lot, maybe not as much as it was in the 80s. I happened to have been involved with the peat study in the 80s, and so I did a little research on that at the time, and they were still cutting peat in Ireland and in Norway, and I'm sure other northern countries where they would have those the right topography and peat. Peat is just not decomposed woody and leaf vegetation. Sphagnum moss, leaves, the vegetation from the plants, and it gets compressed into peat. If you keep compressing it, it will turn into coal. And if you keep compressing it over time, it'll turn into oil. So.
You know why it's called tug? That's where that
Yeah,
tug came
because it
from?
was so much effort, you had to tug it out of the swamp. So, and it was tugging, and the tugging season was after the haying season. So you would cut your hay and get your fields cleared. And by then it's the end of the summer, and the ponds were, as dry as they were going to be. You would have probably opened up the dam at the beginning of the haying season. Probably the ponds were overflowing at that point. Hay until mid-late July, and then start hauling the peat out of the bog and letting it dry and balling it up, as I said, into like cannonballs, stacking them into these four-sided pyramids. So there was air space between each cannonball of tug, so the air could dry through it out. And then after it had air dried and sun dried in the summer, it would get stored into a tug house, which would have often been a foundation walls that were sort of loose rock. So again, a lot of airflow. So again, there's a nice section in Bob Downy's book about that as well. But there was a man that I did know on Block Island named Otto Mitchell. And he and his wife Rosie were the last that I know of who attempted to use peat. And that was in the early, I think it was in the 60s. He told me about it much after that, but they wanted to, they were not that well off, and thought, well, they used to use peat for fuel. I don't know why I can't. I've got this big farm that's almost useless, that swamp. So he asked some old timers and learned how to pull peat and tug, and he did burn it for a while. In a house that's not too far from here, actually. It was Rosie LaRue's last house. And she and Otto were the last ones that I know of who burned and pulled tug for heat. Well, I can't recommend this walk enough because, as I say, in the wintertime, it's a little protected, and it's a short enough walk to get some exercise and not get too cold, and have some beautiful views of the pond. You can go all the way out to the bluff and get some good views of the bluff until your eyes start watering from the wind, and you have all the intriguing history to think about as you walk along.
Well, great, Kim. This has been great. Thank you so much. And there's been some very nice comments of thanks about the wealth of knowledge that you presented. And
Great.
Good.
Always a pleasure. And, all right.
Any other questions, or should we call it a morning?
All right.
All right, Kim. Well, the next
Larry
one's
Kikuchi. I'm right in your backyard.
and Kim, the next one is the March Mystery. That's the next one. So
right.
we're going
the
to have
next
to.
one is a March Mystery. I will say that spring is coming and things are starting to green up just a little bit. So that's a little hint on my March Mystery endeavor.
I guess we'll have to tune in to find out.
That's right.
Thank you, Kim. It was excellent. Just wonderful, wonderful information.
Yeah, great.
Thank you. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Have a good
Josie.
day.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.
Bye, Kim. Bye, Charlotte.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Hey, Candy. Geez, I was supposed to. Oh, geez. That reminds me, I was supposed to contact Lee Klonsky.
I did. They were on. Kim, they were on.
Okay, good. Phew, I forgot.
Don't worry. Okay.
Hi, David. You're on mute, but I don't know if you can hear me. I've been trying to do your Coca Ross thing, keeping the weather, keeping
wait.
track of.
Oh, wait, try
Yeah.
again, David. Try to unmute yourself. I'm sorry. There you
Yeah,
go.
There you-
That's wonderful, Kim. I hope you get to it someday. I keep looking at the map to see when you're going to appear.
Right, it's gonna appear. I've been collecting the data, now I have to get it to them. It was a good winter project.
It would be.
Yeah,
Good luck.
thank you. All right, bye, everybody.
Bye, Kim.
Bye-bye, thanks.